more you travel, the more you realize that it's not just about the destinations. It's about the memories you create and the moments you capture. That is why a camera is the perfect travel companion. With a camera in hand, you become the storyteller of your own adventure. Each click of the shutter freezes time, preserving that fleeting moment forever. And with each subsequent click, a visual diary of your journey starts to form. Through the lens, you are able to notice the smallest details, discover the beauty in the mundane, the vibrant colors of a bustling market, the vastness of a landscape, or the delicate balance of light and shadow, colors and tones. It's in these small fragments that the magic lies, waiting to be discovered and shared. So travel is not just about the places you visit, it's about the stories that you bring back. So as you embark on your next adventure, remember to embrace the power of photography. Capture the laughter, the tears, the unexpected encounters, and the breathtaking views. Create memories that will last a lifetime, and let your camera tell those stories, etched in pixels and prints. So go out there and explore everything. Capture the world and tell your story one frame at a time. So that whole intro was shot entirely on the Pixel 8 Pro on my recent trip to Korea. And surprisingly, this is the first time in my life that I went on a trip and didn't use my real cameras to take photos. Now, don't get me wrong, because I still brought my Sony cameras and a couple of lenses, but I just didn't feel a need to use them. The Pixel 8 Pro was that good. But unfortunately, it's not perfect, and while it can cover 70 to 80% of travel photography, there are still some critical areas that it can definitely improve on. So first, let's dive into the POV segment, where I walk around South Korea shooting some street and travel photography. Throughout this segment, I'll also be going over some general photography tips, as well as showing you guys how I use the Pro controls on the Pixel 8 Pro to capture some more creative looking shots. I am starting off this photo walk on a nice sunny day in Seoul, South Korea. I've been traveling around Korea for over 2 weeks, and I've been using the Pixel 8 Pro as my main camera throughout this entire trip. I thought this POV footage would be a great way to show you guys how this phone performs in real life situations like street and travel photography. This area that I'm starting out in is pretty boring, so as I was waiting to cross the street, I took a couple of warm-up shots just to get into the right mindset. I used the 2x lens, and this image is nothing special, but with a quick crop and edit in post, it could be just a nice shot for Instagram stories. Next, I wandered into this shopping plaza and I took the escalator upstairs. I was really excited to find this overpass because an elevated perspective always makes for more interesting images, since it's not something that you normally see. So here I'm comparing the two sides to see which one has a more interesting scene. I liked the right side with the smaller streets, and there were more people walking around as well. So I spent some time here trying to capture a good shot. I noticed this guy walking across the street, and the timing was perfect because there were no other cars or people crossing at the same time. Using the 2x option provided a great framing for this shot. Then I tried using the 5x telephoto lens, but it was way too tight for this specific shot because it blocked out too much of the environment. But regardless, I am really impressed with the image quality coming out of this telephoto. However, angling up a bit and shooting down the smaller street with that 5x lens created a really cool photo. Because of the compression from the telephoto, you can see all of the layers of the scene. And once again, zooming in on this frame, you can see the quality of this lens. I just love the detail and the color reproduction. I took a bunch of pics here, but I really like this photo of the old van at the intersection. It's just a good reminder that even in street photography, your subject doesn't always have to be a person. Moving on, I'm back on street level, and I really like the way the light was hitting this restaurant. However, on auto mode, I didn't really like the way the pixel was rendering the scene. The contrast in the frame was weak, and you can see how lifted the shadows look. So instead, I'm opening up the Pro controls, and the quickest way to fix this is to adjust the shadow slider. You can see in this shot that the shadows are much darker, and it just creates a more dramatic looking image. But still, the shadows are not as dark as I would have liked, but a quick edit solves that problem. And here's a couple more shots from this area that I wasn't able to record on my POV cam. All of these were edited on the Pixel 8 Pro in Lightroom Mobile with my preset system to achieve that filmic look. I think this style really suits street and travel photography. As I kept walking, this cool building caught my attention, and once again, there is a nice streak of light cutting across the floor. But the 1x camera was too wide for this scene, and once again, the processing on the shadows were also too light. So going into the manual controls, you can adjust the shadow slider to do it quickly, like how I did on the restaurant scene. Or if you want more finer control, you can scroll over to the ISO and shutter speed dials to adjust exposure just like how you would with a real camera. Basically what I'm doing is underexposing to force the camera to capture those darker shadows. And look at what an improvement that makes. This is why having Pro controls are so important, because it just allows you to execute on the vision that you had. I'm so glad Google finally added them into the Pixel 8 Pro. As I kept walking, this other building caught my attention, and I saw this person running down the street, which was perfect timing. Usually I don't like shooting with the 1x camera, but in this case I wanted the full building in the frame, and the 1x lens created a cool wide angle look. After walking around, I went into a cool industrial cafe for some coffee. Unfortunately, the batteries died, so I didn't get any POV footage, but look how nicely the Pixel is able to render this scene. I love the balance of light and shadow, the subtle nuances of the color and tones, and it's especially impressive how it was able to keep everything sharp, even though I was taking these photos spontaneously and walking around at the same time. Alright, now let's move on to some low light and nighttime photography. I tried an ultra wide shot here, and you can see it looks okay at a glance with good color and sharpness. However, there is quite a bit of visible noise in the darker areas, but thankfully it's not too distracting and it definitely doesn't take away from the image. Now I'm shooting over the ledge, and in my experience, this type of scene is pretty difficult for phones to capture. There are a lot of different colors, exposures, and especially with those LED lights, the color temperature can oftentimes be wrong. But I was really impressed with the way the Pixel handled the scene. Everything looks pretty true to life, with good even exposure across the frame. I would have preferred slightly more contrast, and shadows could have been a bit darker, but overall I'm very happy with these images just from a quick snap. Testing out the 5x lens in low light, I'm really surprised with how this shot looks. You can tell there's a good amount of noise reduction going on by the smoothing across the building, but it's still a very nice shot. There is slight ghosting around the Canon logo, but that could just be due to a dirty lens. After walking around the plaza a bit more, I noticed these two people talking, and I moved around and positioned myself so that they were framed by this arch. I thought it was a good idea, and the image definitely looked cooler in my head. However, a horizontal crop does improve it slightly. Making my way down into the shopping plaza, I tried to create some silhouette images of people against the bright LEDs. This storefront with the orange lights looked really futuristic and had some people walking in and out. However, the shot taken with the 1x lens looked a bit too wide. Maybe using the 2x would have worked out better. Anyway, I keep walking into the mall and I finally found the spot that I was looking for. This is the Starfield Library, and it has these floor-to-ceiling bookshelves just full of books. This is such a unique looking library, and I wish I was able to come in the daytime. At night, it's still pretty cool with the bookshelves being lit up by those LEDs. So because it's such a unique space, I wasn't exactly sure what types of photos I wanted to capture. So I was just walking around and taking a bunch of different pics from different places. Then I moved upstairs to get a different perspective. I realized that it is pretty dim in here and I wanted to capture more detail in the bookshelves. So here's a comparison between the regular and night mode using the ultra wide lens. It's interesting that if you use night mode with the ultra wide, you actually are able to capture a slightly wider image. And although both shots look similar, the night mode one definitely has more detail when you zoom in. Then I had the idea to use Pro mode to increase the exposure manually. This way I can capture more light with less noise, but also create a blur effect as the people moved around. So I dialed in my settings, and this created some unique looking shots that most people probably aren't able to capture with just their phone. On a similar note, I had the idea to have my friend walk through the frame using the same long shutter technique. At first, the images weren't great because it was really hard to get the timing right. I realized that there is a delay from when you press the shutter to when the shutter actually activates. But after a few tries, we finally managed to get a couple of good shots. And after a quick edit, this one is definitely my favorite of the bunch. Now I'm back outside and there is a night market that we wanted to explore. So I walked around for a bit to see what kind of shots I can capture. It was super crowded and it was hard to get something good, but it's a perfect scenario for someone who's traveling and just wanting to take memorable pictures of the trip. Because most of the stalls had their own lights, there was still a decent level of brightness for the pixel to work with, but you can tell that the shutter still takes a sec longer and motion blur is more visible. In these busy shots, the focus was a bit off. I could have tapped the screen to fix it, but I didn't realize at the time of shooting. When I'm shooting with a phone, I usually don't like using the ultra wide in low light because the images tend to come out noisier and softer. However, I'm happy to say that the Pixel 8 Pro's improved ultra wide camera performs relatively well. Using this lens and getting close to your subject creates a pretty cool exaggerated perspective that you don't normally see. So I actually really like the way these ultra wide shots came out. Using the 5x telephoto in low light is also not too bad. Sometimes it seems to have a tough time focusing, so I tapped the screen and it was able to lock on fine afterwards. Moving on, I spotted these two people eating in front of a stall. Overall, I just really liked the red and blue contrasting colors within the scene. But once again, I had an idea to use motion blur for a more creative looking shot. So I repositioned myself and adjusted the settings using the Pro controls. Because I knew there was a bit of shutter lag, I was spamming the shutter trying to stay as still as possible. But as you can tell from these shots, I just could not get a good capture. Basically, I wanted the people walking around them to be blurry, while the two people eating are sharp in the middle of the frame. But in most of these shots, the blurry people are blocking the main subjects. But I was really determined to get the shot that I had envisioned, so I stood there for quite a while. And out of the 56 photos that I took, these were the top 3 that were decent. And after editing it, this is definitely my favorite photo of the night. So it was well worth it to wait around and try to capture that shot that I wanted. So as you saw from that POV footage, the Pixel 8 Pro is extremely capable when it comes to street and travel photography. The files that it produces are high quality, natural, and true to life across all 3 cameras. And the number one reason why I love shooting with this phone is the 50 megapixel RAW files. But we'll get more into that later on during the Lightroom segment. First, I want to get into some of the shortcomings and areas in which Google can still improve on. One of the biggest downsides that prevents this from being a near perfect device is the video capabilities. Now, I'm not a professional videographer or anything like that, but I definitely shoot a lot of video content for social media as well as for this YouTube channel. When taking videos natively in social media apps like Instagram and Snapchat, the zooming is extremely inconsistent. Switching from lens to lens is jumpy and even laggy at times. Of course, I expect a little bit of that jankiness when you're switching lenses, but it's especially terrible in social media. Another downside is the video stabilization. And I say video because for photos, it works quite well. But for some reason, when you're shooting video in social media apps, the stabilization looks really artificial and not fluid at all. It almost looks like a robot is panning around and taking the video. No matter how smooth I try to move the camera, in the end, the video still looks robotic. However, this issue only seems to appear when you're shooting in the social media apps, because if you use the native camera app, the video stabilization is a lot better. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not saying the video coming out of the Pixel 8 Pro is terrible. I mean, as you saw in the intro, it can take some really stunning video. I think it's just too inconsistent for it to be reliable. Especially when it comes to low light, you can definitely see a lot of visible noise in darker areas and shadows. And when you're comparing it to older Pixel devices, this is definitely the most improved video that I've seen out of any Pixel. The good news is a lot of these issues definitely seem software related because the hardware is there. These cameras are incredible. Hopefully Google can improve on their video algorithms to make it as good as their photos. Okay, now let's dive into Lightroom and pixel peep at some of these files. On a recent update to Adobe RAW and Lightroom, they now support the RAWs coming out of the Pixel 8 Pro. So this means that as you're uploading the files and editing them, they will automatically apply the pixel picture profile. So things like exposure, contrast, and color will be adjusted from the start. And paired with the 50 megapixel mode across all three cameras, these RAW files are some of the best that I've seen from a smartphone. Take a look at this example. You can see in the top right that it has applied the Google Pixel profile already. And if your display supports it, you can even edit in HDR because the Pixel 8 Pro captures photos in Ultra HDR. Looking at the image as a whole, it is well balanced with nice detail in the highlights and shadows. The entire image is a tad flat in both contrast and color. However, this is to be expected from a RAW file. Zooming into this image at 100%, you can see a fair amount of detail. However, the image does look a tad soft, especially as you move onto the edge of the frame. Now let's compare it side by side with the JPEG. Right off the bat, you can see increased contrast and vibrance from the JPEG on the right. You can even notice how certain colors like the blue sky and water have shifted slightly between the RAW to the JPEG. But zooming in reveals the biggest difference. The JPEG file looks sharp. Too sharp. While it's not nearly as bad as some other phones, you can still see that the image is over-sharpened, compensating for the smaller sensor. This is the reason why I still prefer shooting photos with a real camera. When you're looking at these JPEGs, there is just that look about them that you can tell it was shot from a smartphone. Thankfully, the RAW files look authentic and it doesn't have any of that post-processing, so it's a perfect base to apply your own edits. So I'm going to quickly try and match the JPEG on the right with just a couple of global sliders, mostly contrast, shadow, and various sharpening adjustments. You can see this quick edit gives you 90% of the punch from the JPEG without it looking like it came from a phone. This next example has an even more drastic difference. You can really see the softness from the RAW file. But again, I much prefer this look compared to the processed JPEG. Don't get me wrong, the JPEG does look great, and most people will be extremely happy with it. Only when you are pixel peeping do you notice these small things. So once again, I am applying a couple of really quick global edits to try and match the JPEG. The softness from the RAW file almost gives it a filmic look, especially in the highlights. However, I did notice quite a bit of color noise in the shadows that I wasn't able to remove in Lightroom. So this is a perfect example of where there are advantages to shooting both formats, and thankfully, we're able to shoot both RAW and JPEG with the Pixel 8 Pro. So it's been a couple of months since the Pixel 8 Pro was released, and it's becoming one of the most powerful photo-centric devices that I've used. As you saw throughout this video, the combination of the hardware and the software make it perfect for all-around travel and street photography. And I do hope that Google is able to improve on the video capabilities, especially when it comes to shooting in the native social media apps. And one of my favorite features is the addition of the Pro Controls, because it just allows you to take your creativity one step further and capture the vision that you had in your mind. So I'm curious to hear from you guys, because it seems like the Pixel 8 Pro is a little bit underrated when it comes to its cameras. I haven't really seen too many people talk about all of these different capabilities. If you have this device, let me know how you're shooting with it, or if you plan on getting it, let me know what you're upgrading from. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and if you want to support my channel, please subscribe. It's completely free and it really helps me a lot. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.